In this video, we're gonna make a woven wall hanging using just a few simple materials. So let's get started. I wanted to challenge myself in this video to use very few materials, and these happen to be the same materials that come with our weaving kits. So if you're interested, you can head over to spruceandlinen.com and check those out. All right, so we have some super bulky yarn, a couple of colors of merino wool roving, and some warp string, and that's all I'm gonna use. And choosing materials can be really overwhelming, so sometimes it is just nice to grab only a few and really challenge yourself to make something simple. I'm going to be using our regular size flat pack frame loom for this project, and I'm gonna start with warping my loom. For this weaving, I'm just doing a single warp, which means I'm putting one string between each of the notches. I wanted 30 warp strings, and I just was like, this feels about 30, and I was correct. It always feels really good when I can do that. So I have 30 warp strings on my loom. I'm gonna cut off this end and then just tie probably a triple knot around this last warp string. I'm gonna trim off the excess from both ends just so that it's not in my way. And then I'm gonna flip this over and add some painter's tape so my loom doesn't shift around on me. Next, I'm taking a piece of cardstock that's been folded over. It's about 3 inches tall, and I'm gonna have the bent over edge at the top. And then I'm just gonna weave this in with regular plain weave, which is over one string, under one string, or under over, whichever you like. Now I'm ready to start with the base that will go below our fringe. I'm going to grab about 4 widths of my piece of this yarn. A little bit more than that. I always like to err on the side of a little bit extra so you don't run out. So the first thing I'm gonna do is 1 row of plain weave and then a twining stitch over top of that. And if you do need a tutorial for this stuff, we have a great video called How I Start Every Weaving, and that's gonna show you how I do all of this base work. Now that I've done that base work, I can cut off a little bit of the excess of this first string. And you can see I did have quite a bit of extra. I can either use that later or this will go in my scrap bin. And then I'm gonna take this end, because this is gonna be underneath the fringe, I'm just gonna tuck this back in a few rows just using plain weave, and then we'll sew it in later. Now we're ready to start the fringe, and I am going to use this same yarn for that because the goal here is to not add any additional materials. We're just using 1 type and color of yarn and 2 colors of merino wool roving. So I'm just gonna hold one piece in place about how long I want it and just cut one piece. And I will measure this piece for you. It's about 11 inches long, which is gonna give us approximately 5.5 inches of fringe, a little less because of the knot. Now, one thing I do wanna try with this particular weaving is only doing 2 pieces of the yarn per bundle of the fringe. I used to always do 3, but it can make the fringe quite thick and bulky, so I wanna see what 2 looks like. So I'm just gonna do a Ryan knot, put this on here and see how that feels. And I already can tell you, I think that's plenty full enough. So I'm gonna need 2 pieces per 2 warp strings. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 30. So I'm gonna need 30 pieces total. And I am cutting them one by one. This is not an efficient way to do it, but you know, that's okay. I've kind of lost count. So I'm gonna go ahead and put some of this fringe on and then just see how many more pieces I need to cut. So I'm using 2 pieces at a time, lining up those ends, and then using a simple Ryan knot to put the fringe onto the warp strings. And of course, we do have a Ryan knot tutorial if you need that as well. So yeah, I'm definitely glad I only went with the 2 strands, because even with the 2 strands, it's a very full fringe. Now I'm ready to get started weaving, and I am going to be winging this. This is candid. I haven't planned this ahead of time. I have somewhat of an idea in my mind. I'm taking 3 arms lengths of this, by the way. And I just kind of want to have fun with it and see where we're at. I would like this one to be a little bit more organic. I feel like I've done a lot of straight, stripey kind of pieces lately. So we're gonna do this one with some more waves. Now, for the first wave, I actually want to build up the shape underneath the roving. So I'm just gonna start weaving. So I'm going to use plain weave with this yarn, but I'm not gonna go all the way across my loom. So I'll go this far. It really doesn't matter how far you go. It'll change the shape a little bit. But like I said, I'm just weaving this totally organically. We're just doing it. So I'm gonna go back this direction with plain weave as well. And now you can see that this just makes for a very straight shape so far. So we need to continue building that up, but this time we're not gonna go this far. I'm gonna come back, let's say to here. So I'm on the 5th string back from where I turned around before. And this will help us start building up a shape that has some curve to it. So you can see now we're kind of starting to taper off. So we'll do another row. And again, I just happened to go on the 5th one back from the previous. And now I want to build this up a little bit more over here. So I'm not going to come near as far this time. I'll just come to there and then go back. And that feels like a pretty good curve for me. So I'm just gonna go ahead and loop this back around that far warp string. I'm gonna leave a nice long tail and we will tuck this in later. I'll tuck that into the back. Now I need to decide what color I'm using first. So we can use this beautiful beige color. I think I do want to go with that. Now, to make your merino wool roving go further, you can split it. So this is a very thick, chunky piece, which is definitely an option that you can use to use the whole thickness if you want it to really have a ton of texture. So you can kind of see that this one has a nice natural splitting point. So I'm going to try to grab half in each of my hands and just gently pull this apart, just letting it sort of fall apart as I gently pull. And if I want, I can split it even further than this and use 1/4 of the width, which means you have even more length to work with, which is kind of nice because, you know, merino wool roving is kind of a luxurious material. And so it's nice to make it go as far as you can. I'm gonna weave this over 2, under 2. So it's just like the plain weave we've been doing, but instead of over 1, under 1, it's over 2, under 2. And that's because this is such a chunky material, so I can get away with that. And let's pull out little bubbles. So I'm gonna pull out a chunk like so, where the merino is going over top of the warp strings. Now that's looking cute to me there. And I'm gonna pull this off. So we wanna leave a tail that we can tuck in later, but when you pull wool roving apart, you want your hands to be quite spread, and then you're just gonna gently pull, and it'll come off like that. I probably could have done that a little bit shorter, but that's okay. So now that I have that in there, I kind of wanna lock it in with the plain weave, and now that I'm realizing I probably didn't need to cut off that end that I did before, but this time I'm gonna come all the way to the edge. So I'm gonna start from left to right, and just do a row of plain weave over this whole section. And that will help kind of lock in this roving. I'm gonna go back again. Now, when you are going at an angle like this, you wanna make sure you have lots of slack. So I make a nice big arch and let that push down over top of this. Okay, so that's our first little roving section. Now I need to decide where I'm going next. So we only have 2 colors. This is usually a little bit easier if you have 3 colors because you can go 1 color, 2 color, 3 color, and it staggers them. So not all of this color is on one side and all the other colors on the other side like we would end up with this. So what I could do is also add this on this side. And then once I start building up on this side, I can go back to this color. So I'm gonna split this as well, just like I did with the beige. I think for this one, I'm gonna split this into 1/4. And I kind of want to do a bit of a sumac stitch over top of this section, but maybe I won't go all the way to the edge. Maybe it would even look pretty if I started it over here. So for our sumac stitch, I'm gonna be working from left to right, but that means we're gonna be wrapping from right to left. So I'm gonna grab 2 warp strings. I have my tail in my left hand, I have this in my right hand, and I'm gonna feed it underneath from right to left, those 2 warp strings. I'm gonna leave just a reasonably lengthed tail. Now I'm skipping 2, and I'm grabbing the 2 after that. And you can kind of see that sumac stitch come together. Skipping 2, grabbing 2. Skipping 2, grabbing 2. Now I think I'm gonna go all the way across the loom with this. Let's go with that. We're gonna pull off this tail and just let that hang out in the back. Now I wanna add some more yarn. And what I could do here to not cut this off again is I'm just gonna take this loop off. We'll see if this will work. And I'm gonna start weaving back this direction, and then I'm gonna just tuck this back in. Here we go. I'll go all the way across the loom for a couple of rows here. And when you're using a linen warp string and merino wool roving, the merino sometimes kind of sticks to the linen. And so that's why you'll see me sort of pull the warp strings back apart so that they're not just gonna stay stuck together. Not a big deal. It's just something because linen is a little bit more rough. That's what happens. Okay, so now I wanna start building up another shape over on this left side. So I kind of want to build it up so it starts to go like this. Actually, I don't like that. Do I like this at all? That's the real question. So, full disclosure, I got to a point and I started looking at this and I'm like, I don't know if I like it. So I'm backing up, and I mean, it's not a big deal. And I know that unweaving can be frustrating at times, but as my weaving teacher said in college, unweaving is just as much a part of weaving as weaving. So I used to hate it when she said that. I'm not gonna lie. It would like kind of make my blood boil because I hated backing up. And I mean, I don't like it, but I also I wanna make something that I actually like. So I'm gonna undo this. I don't know why, but I just don't really like it. So I'm taking it out, and that is totally okay to do. I really like the way that this beige is looking. And so maybe what I do want though is more separation between the colors of merino. So I'm gonna do some more plain weave so that we have that separation. I wasn't loving how the colors were just right on top of each other. I feel like what needs to happen is there needs to be a shape built up here, just using plain weave. But I'm gonna leave this low point where it is. So now we have another additional shape being formed over on this side. So now I wanna go back in with this. And now I'm actually thinking that maybe what I didn't like is that the textures were very similar. So they were both sticking out of the weaving very similarly. So I think what I would like to do with this is almost treat it like it is just yarn. And maybe I'm gonna try weaving it regular plain weave. So that's over one, under one. And we'll see what that looks like. So it's gonna give a more subtle feel to this darker color. And I think I already like that much better. And then what I could do is maybe we'll go all the way across with it as well. I think that looks really pretty. So now that I have that in, I'm thinking my strategy will be sort of to have the beige going from one side and then the dark going all the way across, and then the beige going from the other side and the dark going all the way across. Especially in a smaller piece, sometimes it's nice to have an actual like strategic way that you're gonna do this. Now this piece is going on the under. I think I'm going to cheat this and have this far and just go over two, just to give that a cleaner edge right there. So now we can go back in with the yarn. We're gonna need to loop this around. So now that I've built up some white here and some white here, I'm thinking I want to build this up in the middle now. So we're just continually adding to the organic shapes. So I'm just kind of going part way across, and then I'm going to go back. Now I've built up this shape in the middle, and I'm going to get some more of the beige wool roving. And I'm going to do the same thing I did here, but on this side now. So I'm going to weave over 2, under 2, and I'm just going to pull these little loops out. And maybe we'll end this one a little bit shorter. Okay, and then I'll grab some more of the yarn. So now I'm just weaving that plain weave over top of the next section of beige. And then what I want to do is build up over here again. So what I'm trying to do when I do a piece like this is create some balance. It doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical by any means, but you can see here we've built up some white here on the right, on the left, and then in the middle. So then I want to go back to building on the right, on the left, in the middle. And then same when we're talking our merino wool roving. We have the beige coming from the right, dark going through the whole thing, and then beige coming from the left. So we're trying to sort of balance the materials so we don't have all the beige, like I said, on one side, all the brown on the other side, which could be a really beautiful piece if you do it intentionally. But I want to, in this case, make sure that the materials feel sort of like they're all mixed in nicely together. Now I'm going to go back in with this color, and we're weaving in over 1, under 1. I could use my tapestry needle for this. I just didn't feel like switching it. So I'm just using my hands, which is much slower, but that's okay. Okay, so now we can pull that tail off. And now I'm going to take this yarn, we're gonna loop it back around, and I'm gonna build this shape up small first and then get wider and wider. I'm actually happy with that shape. So we're gonna grab more of the merino, the beige merino, and I think this will be enough. I'm gonna go over 2, under 2, starting from the right to the left. And this piece, I'm not gonna go as far across, because what I like to make sure when I'm doing these back and forth pieces that this one ended here, so I wanna make sure this next one doesn't end at the same point. I'm gonna have it more in the middle. So that would be pretty much right here. So now to lock this in, I'm gonna go all the way across. Now you can see we're getting pretty close to the top, so it's gonna be almost time to end this piece right away here. But we kind of need to fill it in so we get to a point where it's more straight at the top. Now, before I put one more piece in of the brown, I wanna build this side back up a little bit. So I'm gonna start really narrow and just slowly work my way out from there. I'm gonna grab another piece of the brown. And I'm thinking I might need one more little piece of the beige to finish this off, but we'll see where we end up. So I'll pull off a piece there. And again, we've kind of ended going under the string. I'm just gonna lift this back up here. I'm out of yarn now. You can see the top is not yet even. I would like to try grabbing another piece of the roving, and we're gonna actually kind of cheat this and make it so that this kind of is what evens out the top of the piece. So starting from left to right, we're gonna go over 2, under 2, just like we have been for the beige. And I'm gonna end this right about there. So we're gonna make these bubbles a little bit less so that they're going a bit straighter, as you can see, and that'll help even out the top. So now I'm grabbing one more piece of our yarn. I think this time I'm just gonna do 2 arms lengths. I won't even need that much, but I'm not entirely sure how much I do need, so better be safe than sorry. So I'm getting very, very close to the top now, so I have to end this piece pretty quickly now, but I wanna make sure there's enough plain weave at the top that things will stay really secure. So I'm gonna make sure there's still that nice big arch there. And what I'll do here is I'm actually just gonna push down the roving, as you can see, so it goes a little bit straighter. We'll put another row in here. So roving is a great way to fill in those gaps once you get close to the top and you need to straighten things out. You can also do it with plain weave, but we're kind of doing a combination. Okay, so you can see that I've sort of manipulated this in a way that now we've got a pretty straight top, and that will get straightened out even more with the twining stitch. So I'm just gonna do one more row of plain weave, and then I'll do my twining stitch on top of that. So I'm gonna cut this off, leaving a nice long tail, and then start this new piece on the other side for my twining stitch. If we turn around, it tends to pull the edge in too much, so that's why I'm starting this new piece. Okay, so now you can see with that twining stitch in there, locking everything in, I'm able to easily straighten out the top even more. And now we're ready to flip this piece over, tuck in all the ends, and get this done. So before I actually flip this over, I don't know if you can see it, but I have got some fuzzies. So I'm gonna grab just a Kleenex or a cloth, whatever you have laying around, and I'm gonna just use this to kind of wipe up all those specks because I don't want all those little fuzzies getting onto my merino. I'm gonna remove the tape, and then I'm bringing all those ends that we need to tuck in from the front to the back. I like to always start with the merino to tuck in first, just because it always feels so big and messy. And so I find that tucking in the merino first makes it feel less overwhelming quicker. So I have this little plastic yarn needle. These are so great for the finishing process. They're a lot shorter than my tapestry needles, and they have a nice big eye still so that we can easily get into these nooks and crannies to tuck in the ends. So for this end, and for all the beige ends, we went over 2 under 2. So anywhere here where I can grab a warp string, I'm gonna pull this back in. I don't wanna pull this super hard because we pulled up those loops in the front, and I wanna keep those loops in the front. So I'm gonna grab these 2 warp strings, 1 or 2, doesn't really matter. And that is good there. Now I'm gonna cut this off, but you'll notice I'm not cutting it off super short. So I'm cutting it off plenty long enough that that warp string will just hold this into place, but it still lays quite flat. So I'm gonna do that with all of the beige ends. If your piece is a little bit short and it's coming off your needle, you can actually just sew your needle in first and then thread it with the wool or yarn, whatever you've got that's too short, and then pull it through. All of my beige ends are tucked in, and I'm gonna do the same thing with these brown ones. So I'm gonna thread the wool into my yarn needle, and I'm just grabbing these warp strings on the back. 3 or 4 is plenty. Don't pull this too hard. We don't want it to kind of pull in the edge, and then trim that off. You can sort of floof out these ends too to help them hang on a little bit better as well. So I'm gonna do that same thing with all the brown. All right, now we're ready to tuck in all these yarn ends. And I'm gonna try to tuck these in to the same areas that we were just tucking in the wool, because I know that'll make them the least visible from the front. They won't be visible at all from the front that way. So I'm just gonna go over top of these, grab the warp strings, and then trim that off. The other thing you can do is knot them. So right here is a good example of where it would be an easy place to knot. So I wrapped it around a warp string, and then I could just tie a knot like that and cut it off. If you're paranoid, you can always just go back through one more warp string there as well. This one is a little bit trickier, so this one I'm going to tuck in through these little channels. So I'm just grabbing the loops on the back of the weaving and pulling that through. Grab one more. I do want to flip this over and see what it looks like from the front. Sometimes doing it this way you can see it a little bit, but that's not bad at all. So I'm just gonna finish up tucking in all these ends, and then we're gonna get this off the loom. All right, so now I'm gonna flip all of this fringe over top of my weaving, and I'm gonna slip out this piece of cardstock, and then I'm gonna grab this first string and then the next loop and tie an overhand knot, and then just sort of butt it up against the bottom of the weaving. And then the next one, I'm gonna grab just one loop and do the same thing. So I'm gonna do these overhand knots all the way across. And then on the very end here, we'll be grabbing one loop plus one string, just like we did on the other end, and overhand knotting those all together. So now I can just slip this off of my loom, and I'm gonna grab an even smaller needle. This one here, it's just another different type of yarn needle, but you can see it's once again even shorter than the other one I was using. And I'm gonna tuck in all of these warp strings. So I'm just going through these little loops above the warp string. For this one, I'm gonna need to cut off this knot. So I've sewn in the needle, and then I'm gonna thread the needle because these are pretty short. Pull that through, and then I can just trim off the excess. So I'll do that again. And I'm gonna do this all the way across so that we have a really nice, tidy bottom of the back. And then also so that these warp strings don't stick out through the front. All right, so now we're ready to attach this to the dowel, and then we're gonna talk about the fringe. So for the dowel, I'm just using this 5/8 inch thick dowel, and it's about 9 inches long. I'm gonna grab a book or just something heavy to put on the end just so that it doesn't shift around. So we're grabbing 3 loops at a time. So I have them opened up. I'm gonna flip them over, and then I'm gonna flip them over again. So I'm twisting them together, bringing all those loops together, and then slipping that over my dowel. This is pretty tight, but it all worked out. So I'm gonna do that again. So grabbing 3 loops, opening them up, flipping them forward, and then twisting them one more time before I bring them together. And I'm gonna keep doing that all the way across. So I only have to do it 3 more times. So I've got it all on the dowel now, and I'm gonna grab more of my warp string and tie on a hanging string. So I like to wrap this around 3 or so times and then just knot it. And then as far as the length goes, I just always eyeball this. I find that, like, I don't know, halfway down, sometimes it changes though. We could do 2/3 down. Right about there looks pretty good to me. Then I'm gonna wrap it around 3 times, make sure I have plenty of length, and then just knot the other end as well. Okay, so now is for the magical part of this video where we're going to steam out the fringe. Now, you don't necessarily have to do this. This fringe is actually laying pretty straight on its own, but I'll show you this trick because it is super handy for when you're doing a longer fringe or when your fringe just isn't laying straight. So I'm gonna let this heat up, and then we will steam out the fringe. So my steamer is all heated up, and I will link the one that I have in the description box below. This is just a closed steamer though, so any steamer you have will work great. So here we go. Let's steam this out, and you're just gonna see that yarn really relax. And I can turn it around, make sure we get the back can just kind of make sure everything's sitting straight. And see, it just works so well. And now we have really nice straight fringe, so we just need to cut it at the bottom. So I'm gonna be eyeballing this. If you prefer measuring, you can definitely do that as well. But I always start out with just grabbing all the ends that are very clearly longer than the rest. And then with a smaller piece like that, it is usually pretty easy just to like hang it in front of you and just trim. All right, it's all done, so let's have a look at the finished piece. I hope this gives you some ideas on how you can use a few very simple materials to make a woven wall hanging, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this one next. And don't forget to head to spruceandlinen.com if you want to grab one of our beginner weaving kits.